I want to ask you about what you see going on in the world. I'll try and narrow it as best I can. You see Russia has invaded Ukraine. It's trying to destroy their cities. You have not just a historical knowledge, but an ancient historical knowledge. What is Putin going to do, particularly if we ramp up our support of the Ukrainians and NATO ramps up its support of the Ukrainians? What is Russia going to do? Just keep bombing cities and killing civilians?
Yeah, I think he's got a second strategy, and it's a lot of people have remarked upon it, Mark. It's the Aleppo-Grozny strategy. He can't take the country. They didn't surrender. So he's going to take maybe from Kiev and the line from the Black Sea through Kiev to the north to Belarus and everything to the east. He's going to have a Carthaginian solution. And that means that he's going to create his own desolate borderlands. And he, in his mind, he has to justify to the Russian people why 15 to 20,000 of their young people have been killed. And I think he'll say, I destroyed Ukraine for 30 years, and they will have no military, they'll have no ability to have a nation, and this will send a signal to everybody else. So that's his strategy, is nihilism now. It's not to take over the country. He can't do that. He doesn't have the ability to defeat the Ukrainian forces, occupy the country, put a puppet government in, and create a quasi-border autonomous zone. He can't do that, so he's going to destroy it, and that's where we are.
And yet in Ukraine, he's probably created a number of communities, maybe even millions of people now, who hate him, who want revenge, who are going to fight back for these territories. And Russia's going to have to contend with that potentially in the future, no?
Absolutely. And I think we were very remiss, because I think in October when he massed troops on the border, we could have been flooding Ukraine with javelins and stingers and SAMs, and we didn't do that. And now we've kind of caught up, and we being the West, and there's tens of thousands of weapons in the hands of groups of 2 and 3 people. So if he goes into Kiev, I think it's going to look like Leningrad in 1941 to 44, or Stalingrad, or something like that, or maybe the Russian siege of Berlin. It's going to be messy, but he's not going to like it. And so they're going to keep fighting. And we're kind of in a quandary, Mark, because we want Ukrainians to live. We want their cities to survive. But if we suggest that they negotiate, Putin's going to see that they're negotiating from a position of weakness. So we want them to get the edge in the battle, even though that's going to take more casualties and tragedies and devastation. But the only way that they're going to survive, if they choose negotiations, is to have some type of leverage at the negotiating. And that means defeating and killing Russians, which means more devastation for everybody.
And of course, Russia has a fairly small economy, even though it has very powerful nuclear weapons. And you have to wonder how long they can keep up with this, which raises the next question. Communist China and Xi, who is his ally, openly is an ally of Russia. He looks at all this, and then he looks at Taiwan, and what do you think he's thinking?
I think he's troubled, Mark. I think when the invasion started, he green-lighted it, and he thought, you know what, we'll cover your entree into commercial or financial opportunities, even if you're sanctioned by the West, because you're going to take over Ukraine very quickly. We need your minerals and your natural resources, especially your oil, and you're desperate, so you're going to sell it to us at a discount, and we're going to charge you a lot to keep up your commercial global role and opportunities. So that was what he was thinking. And more importantly, the West won't react. The United States is in decline. So your blueprint in Ukraine will work for us in Taiwan, because the international community won't do anything. And now, all of a sudden, Mark, I think he thinks, wow, maybe, what if the Taiwanese fought like the Ukrainians? What if the West poured weapons into Taiwan as they did to Ukraine? What if these world sanctions were applied to us? So now I think he's got his finger in the wind and telling Putin, well, we're with you if you win, but if you don't count on us. So I think they're just opportunistic, and they're going to see who wins and who loses. That's why I think it's very important that Putin loses, and he pays a price for it, and then that tells the Chinese, you really don't want to go down that route. But should he destroy all of eastern Ukraine and then announce it was a victory, and there's nobody left there, they've all left, then I'm very worried that China would say, well, we can create a desert in Taiwan and call it victory.
Shouldn't we be helping the Taiwanese now, helping them arm up more than we are? Because obviously they haven't been invaded yet. I agree 100% with your point about Ukraine in October. It's nonsensical.
I think you're absolutely right. I mean, this is where Taiwan is now is analogous to where Ukraine was in October. So we don't have to announce it, but we should be sending especially javelins and stingers and SAMs in the hands of the Taiwanese that can start training sort of a nation in resistance. So they can tell the Chinese, you may be able to come in here, you may be able to land amphibious troops, but you're going to pay a terrible price in the streets of Taipei and all throughout Taiwan. And I think that would be something that would really scare the Chinese.
You know, in December, the Ukrainians specifically asked Biden for these Harpoon missiles because they knew they were going to be attacked from the Black Sea and so forth, and he wouldn't give it to them.
That's an excellent point, Mark. That was and you notice that wasn't really widely reported at the time. And that did a lot of damage, because if they had those missiles now, the Russians would not be getting close to shore from the Black Sea, and they wouldn't be thinking of an amphibious invasion, because after all, that's the most vulnerable type of sea craft when you've got soldiers on it, and hundreds or thousands can be taken out with a single missile. And so that's very dangerous. But I'm worried about all the ripples that are coming out of this Ukrainian mess, and that is especially Iran. I think we've overlooked that. The idea that we're using Putin as an interlocutor, and we invited him into Iran. It's just like John Kerry did, remember, in 2015, I think, when we invited Putin into the Middle East, and he's there. But if you think about what's going on in Iran, it's just mind-boggling that we're basically creating a scenario where Russia is already controlling the airspace of Syria, and they will be now maybe wink and nod telling Israel, this country is going to get a bomb because we're doing the negotiations, and they may be under our nuclear umbrella. So if you have any idea of preempting, be careful, because we may retaliate in kind to you. And by the way, if Hezbollah starts sending missiles from Syria, we're not necessarily going to discourage them. And I don't think, I really admire Zelensky, but when he said the Israelis should not only vote against Russia, which they did in the UN, but sanction them, I thought, well, yeah, they should, but if they do, we've created such a mess now that Putin could unleash Hezbollah missiles into Israel. Israel couldn't get into Syria because of the Russian air defenses. And maybe they're going to protect Iran under their nuclear umbrella, and that would ensure a disaster for Israel. So all of this gets back to that moment of weakness that convinced Putin to go into Ukraine.